Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome to the first episode of Retro Reviews. So this is a new show that we're doing on the channel. It is going to function basically like a review discussion that we've done before, but Retro Reviews is going to give it, considering that there's no new movies coming out of the cinema, that's a big thing while we're doing this, but also it's going to give us the opportunity to look back at a bunch of franchises, older films, sort of, we don't really have dates locked down for like certain decades we're looking at, just old big franchises that we haven't yet talked about on the channel, and ones that we feel like we have something to say and want to discuss on the channel. So Rocky being chief among them, we wanted to kickstart with this in that the cinemas were just starting to, at least our local cinemas at least, were showing the Rocky films sort of each week, every 2 weeks. We had this whole thing planned out. We were going to do this much later down the line once they'd all got released. And I guess I'm going to immediately date this episode. We're going into another national lockdown this week. So that's put paid to plans of going to see Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 at the cinema, unfortunately. So we wanted to just move it forward and talk about Rocky. It's a franchise that we've always mentioned that we love, that, you know, it's very near and dear to our hearts. And we've, for whatever reason, we just haven't spoken about it, whether we've been busy with other films and other things on the channel. But not today. Today we're going to be starting our first review with Rocky 1. And Retro Reviews is going to be a show that we do every Tuesday at 10 p.m. And we're just going to go through the entire Rocky franchise for the next bunch of weeks. Then we've got some other things planned after that one. So we'll go into socials now, just so that you can keep abreast with like everything that we're bringing out with this show and indeed everything else. So over to you, George.
Absolutely. So, as usual, guys, we always say the best way to find out what we're doing is by following us on our social media accounts. Now, we're pretty scheduled up at this point, so we've got these every Tuesday. If you're watching now, to put another date on it, we've had Chapter 9/Episode 1 of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. So, we're going to be back on this Friday evening with Episode 2 of that. But as usual, the best way, you know, if anything happens, if there's any emergencies, or if we want to do a surprise video between now and then, which very well could happen, the best way to find out is, as usual, Facebook, Cinema Savvy, Twitter at cinema_savvy, and we also have a link in the description for our merch. Now, obviously, what we also have with this is our YouTube account. So we've got some goals we're trying to get towards. We want to push through for the end of this year. The only way we can reach those if we have you guys subscribing, sharing our videos, and of course liking and commenting, because the algorithm is a very weird thing indeed. So if you do want to support us in that way, that would honestly help us go the extra mile. And obviously, if you are a fan of Rocky, I don't know why you wouldn't be watching this video if you're not actually, but as you can tell, it's something new. It's something, as Chris said, we haven't spoke about. This is a franchise. I'm going to jump off the cliff first and say it's a lot nearer to your heart than mine. I do love it, and we'll go into these, but I know that this franchise is something we've wanted to talk about for a while, and this new series Retro Review, guys, this gives us a chance to go through old franchises not discussed. I mean, we're not going to say what's coming up after this, but we are obviously going to say that we are doing the 6 Rocky films. If you want to talk Creed 1 and Creed 2, then we're going to have to wait for Creed 3 to get that trilogy done, because the OCD will be too strong as much as we want to do Creed 1 and Creed 2. So it's basically a way for us to say, you know, there's no films at the cinema. You know, Bond would have been, I think, this week or next week. It would have been its third, well, actually, ignoring all the issues on set, coronavirus postponements, that was its second release date. So we've got nothing coming out, and obviously lockdown 1, we had a really good time. We did quizzes, we did watch-alongs. Do check out our Scooby-Doo drink along from last Saturday, but this is giving us a way to carry on doing reviews, but it's giving us the time at home to go back to things we might not have seen for a long time, because we'll get into last time I saw Rocky 1 later on, but some of these films we've discussed about watching in the future or reviewing in the future, I've never seen, or I've not seen in maybe 4 or 5 years, or you haven't seen. So it's going to be a really cool wave, I think, for people on the channel to sort of bond. It's nice because, you know, we said it as well. We were going to watch these together in person at one of the cinemas sort of between where we live, and for obvious reasons, that's now not going ahead. So yeah, it's given us a chance to watch them, and I'm really looking forward to this. I know we're live and we're just praising ourselves, but I think these are going to be really good fun. If you liked our Nolan month, it's going to be very similar, but obviously it's not a Rocky month. It's just going to be one Rocky video a week. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, Rocky's always one of those franchises, just jumping straight into the film now. If ever I just watch the first one, literally in isolation and figuratively, I always end up just watching the entire series. It's just a natural thing that happens. Maybe that's, you mentioned OCD, maybe that's the OCD in me, but it always kind of goes that way. And yeah, the franchise to me is near and dear to my heart, but we always usually talk about our experiences with it and how we got into the film, how we got into the franchise. And honestly, I'm really struggling to remember. I know that I didn't get to this film until exceptionally late in the game. My best friend growing up, he was very much into this film. This was one of his films that sort of inspired him very early in life, and he went into boxing. So I kind of grew up around him, the whole boxing thing and mentions of Rocky, but I never went into it for whatever reason, even like Stallone's catalogue. And this is the film that kind of did put Stallone very much on the map. He was an unknown before this point. And I think, honestly, I just caught it on TV one time. I think it was going through that phase that I do where I'm trying to cross all like the big hitter films off my list. This, of course, did win Best Picture the year it came out, 1976. So it would have been the following year at the Oscars. And I just watched it, and Rocky has this insane, huge amount of hype. The cultural impact that this film had was absolutely immeasurable and still has to this day. The locations from Philadelphia, which we'll get much later on into in the review. So I went in expecting this huge, epic masterpiece of a film, and I remembered enjoying it, but not kind of holding it to that degree that I do now. And I think that it was a film that the more times that I watched it, went deeper into the series, got attached to these characters and the relationships and seeing the drama as it progressed, arguably into more ridiculous territory by the time we get to Rocky 3 and 4, but we still love it. It made me sort of go back to this first one with much more reverence. And as I've got older, in my older age, I will say that this is probably the best Rocky film. It's not my favorite. It's sort of, we talk about Star Wars this way, how there's an objective best and our favorite, and I think it's very much the same with this one as well. This one has it all in terms of the drama, and it works as a standalone piece as well. The whole story, the 3 acts, it comes full circle within this movie to the point where you probably wouldn't need sequels, but I'm very glad that we got them. But I do like the kind of more zany, cartoony stuff that we get later on into the franchise. So it's a very long-winded way of me saying that basically I can't remember, but it is something that did grow on me as the years have gone on, and now it's without doubt one of my favorite films ever made.
So I've definitely told you this before. So the first Rocky film I ever watched was actually Rocky Balboa.
Okay.
So it was at the cinema. So yeah, at the time, I think was it 06. I would have been 9-10 years old, depending on what time of the year it came out. And one of my close friends at the time was really big on boxing. He never did it, but his family used to watch it a lot. And there's like Muhammad Ali posters in the house and stuff. And I remember just going, like, I don't know, it was a birthday or something. You go to a cinema with your friends, you go out for a meal after with their family and stuff. It was one of them. So I remember going to cinema. It's like we're watching Rocky Balboa. I was like, oh, cool. There's no 2, 3, 4, 5 in the name. It must be this film about just this boxer. And I didn't know Stallone at the time. I hadn't seen any of his films. At that age, you know actors, but not necessarily like status. And obviously, I wasn't used to it. So I was like, oh, this guy's been. Why is this film about this sort of old man coming back? And why is there like a PS2 video game? We'll get to that in the Rocky Balboa review. But I was really confused because my dad's like, oh, Rocky this. I was like, I've just watched Rocky. He's like, no. I was like, that's something new. So years went by. I didn't rush home to get a box set or anything like that. It didn't work. But then I must have been at secondary school, and I think when I used to collect like DVDs, when I was getting to film, like my parents, if there was a cheap box set, maybe my dad once was 1 or 2, they'd buy it. I think we got the Rocky exact same box set you have that we were talking off air yesterday. And I remember, I think it must have been like £10-15. And my dad's like, these are great films, you'll love them. I remember watching Rocky 1. I'm not going to, obviously we're going to do this each time, but I just remember, I don't remember the film. I don't remember, obviously I enjoyed it. I just remember when he starts running, and we'll get to that later on, I went out for a jog after, and that is not something that happens. That's something that never happens. I can't run on a treadmill. I can run 100 meters. I do not jog in the place I live or anywhere nearby. So yeah, that's like my biggest takeaway from watching it for the first time. Obviously, as you grow older, it's like you, though, some films you'll always remember that first time because it's got that impact. But this would have been, okay, I saw this, and then I watched 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. I was like, oh, it's Rocky Balboa again. It's actually the last one. And this is pre-Creed. There is no discussion of Creed when this happened too, which is, I think, really important to bring up. So yeah, it's just one of the franchises that, I think at that age it was more ticking it off a list, but having a really good time with it. At that age, I'm a lot more aware of Stallone. Don't know if the Expendables have been out yet, but it was around about me going back to all these 80s. I started to see like Predator, Terminator. I started to see all these like 80s heroes' films, and going back to Rocky, and I just remember really enjoying it. But it's a franchise that I've grown to respect even more as I've grown older, because it's so easy for people to do a pop chart when it's saying, oh, it's this over the top, ridiculous, this is that, oh, Rocky 5's awful, all that stuff everyone's heard a million times over. And I didn't really get that as much as everyone else. I certainly see and understand, but I was never put off this franchise by anything like that. Whether that's because I've grown up with the likes of Star Wars, or I've enjoyed things like Transformers. It's quite hard for me to sort of disrespect a sort of 40-year-old franchise to that point where people can just mindlessly throw it under a bus. I'm not even talking about Creed, and this is all before Creed, before suddenly now they want Stallone to have an Oscar, which he still didn't unfortunately get. Catch our sad live stream to that from a couple of years ago. But no, it's one of those franchises where I was really looking forward to rewatching them, because I think they are important films, and in terms of sports films, there are few better. You don't get many sports franchises, but looking off the one above us right here, Rocky, to me, as you said, the best. Maybe I'm not going to say it's my favorite yet. I'm really excited to re-go through all 6 of these, because I want to get a definitive list for, as we always say, what's my favorite, what do I enjoy the most. So I'm looking forward to redoing it, but I'm quite sure that I think this is the best one. Saw it again, sorry to cut you off. I saw it again at the cinema. The last film I watched before the lockdown started. Was amazing to see it at the cinema. I had really good time. Cineworld was showing one every day. Couldn't commit to that, unfortunately. But then obviously one of the other cinema chains was like, hey, we're doing it every 2 weeks. This is where me and you came into it. And then lockdown happened. So if this is the last film I ever see at a cinema, then, it was this.
You're going out on a high with it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, that's the kind of franchise meaning. It's a weird one, because when we've done like Nolan month and Star Wars ones, it's like, here's an hour of us talking nostalgia. Whereas this one's like, it's fun because we're doing something different.
And I might be jumping the gun here, like talking about like a favorite moment, but it's interesting there that you said it made you want to go out, and you did go out on a run straight afterwards. And I think this film is incredibly inspiring, even to this day, even however many decades after the fact. Rocky now is a legacy character, but especially everyone looks forward to the training montages. That's always a thing that you look forward to with every sort of like next Rocky installment. And granted, I didn't sort of grow up waiting for another Rocky installment. I guess I kind of do have that now with the Creed films, but it's just the impact is undeniable with this film. And if we go into sort of like the behind the scenes and the tone of it as well, this one is probably the most grounded, and then it kind of got away from itself a little bit. Rocky essentially, although it's a film about boxing, it's never been about the boxing with this film. It's not like, that's just sort of dressing of the film, like set dressing of the film. It's about just Rocky trying to find his self-respect. He's called a bum. He wants to make something of himself. He wants to prove himself in the sort of slums of Philadelphia, and just sort of trying to get that opportunity. He knows that he's destined for greatness. People around him, like Mickey, who we'll get into later when we talk about the characters, he says, like, you kind of had the makings of greatness in you, but you never took the shots, and you're a bum, you're washed up. So it's a very... I'd say it's a very timeless story, because I think all of us feel that at some point where, you're waiting for a break, you're trying to like better yourself in some way. And I think it's a really timeless story in that way. And I think that's why it connects with a lot of people that it does. But this is an inherent drama. And this was a passion project of Stallone. He wrote the script for this thing. It was done on a very, very small budget. I think it was just a little over $1 million at the time. And no one wanted to pick it up. He took it to execs and they liked the scripts, but Stallone was adamant that he wanted to star as the lead in it. And as he was an unknown at that point, or hadn't really done anything of worth, he certainly wasn't a household name to slap on a poster. No studios would take it up. I think they were throwing out names like Robert Redford. I think Burt Reynolds was mentioned as well. Already established names to lead this great script that he'd written. He was adamant though, and his agents and everything, and pushed for it, and thank God they did, because can you imagine anyone else as Rocky? Not to take anything away from Redford or Reynolds or anything like that, but I cannot see them in this role at all. So it's kind of a happy accident. And we say this a lot with films as well, limitations that they were faced with budgetary wise, and they had to kind of work around it, do craft some of the best scenes, best moments, and scenes maybe they originally planned that they couldn't do end up becoming better when they have to kind of rein it back in. And it's just an absolute masterclass really of acting, writing. I like the way that Rocky talks in this film, and it might turn some people off. It is kind of everyone like parodies like the way he talks and everything like that. But there is a very real, raw sense to this film. It does feel like, I won't say like a documentary in some way, but it does feel like someone's just set a camera up in the life of this guy. The dialogue, the way it's delivered, some of it sounds improvised, and maybe some of it was, all of it wasn't written. The way that he kind of talks and has this back and forth, and he goes on his long talks, whether he's giving life lessons to people or he's having banter with Adrian in the pet store, it all feels very real. And that's what hits me now. And as you get older, I think you appreciate this film more because you attach yourself to those life lessons, everything that he goes through in this film. So I think tonally, this one nails it. And I think this tone was brought back by the time we get to I think the tone's kind of there with Rocky 2. I think it's still very much in the same ballpark, but it was definitely brought back with Rocky Balboa later down the line to be more closer to what this film achieved. But I just love the feel, the look, everything. I mean, the poster around us right now, the border, just the black and white of it. I know it's not a black and white film, but just that gritty, real quality to it. It's absolutely unmissable in this film.
And I think this is a really big thing with Rocky because it's what you mentioned. As you grow older, as a sort of, I was probably 13, 14, I didn't really get, not that I didn't get the age and stuff. It's like, oh, come on, where's the boxing? And a lot of people would be like that because, this Rocky franchise is the illustrious boxing franchise. But to me, it can't reach the level it did get to without this being a drama first. You mentioned, I actually really liked that you brought that patch. I hadn't thought of it, that Stone is this real person. And when he's written this film, and the reason he obviously took longer to get it done was that he had to play the lead role. And it's what you said, you cannot imagine anyone, no matter how great they were, you cannot imagine anyone else being in this. And you mentioned documentary, it feels like semi-autobiographical. Obviously, Stallone wasn't a boxer, but you feel that he's writing these words because he knows how he wants it to be presented. He knows at what point he's going to be over the top. He knows at what point he'll be sort of calm and quiet with himself. And you mentioned the agent stuff, obviously, which we'll get to. But as I've grown older, some of my favorite scenes of this have sort of switched around and different things. I said it before we hit live, but I love the stuff with his dog. It's honestly one of my favorite stories in the history of cinema. If you don't know, I'm just going to say now. Obviously, he'd written this film. Well, I think just before he was writing it, so he was homeless at the time, really struggling, and he had his dog with him, and he basically couldn't afford to feed the dog, which is really sad. And he ended up having to sell the dog for, I think he said about $50 or $500 or something like that. And he said that because it was his best friend, is the person that was in for everything, he said that changed him. He was his mindset, everything changed because he had to sell his dog. And then he sold the script. He got cast. It was all looking well. He approached the owner, said, I want my dog back. He ended up paying $15,000 for his dog, which is ridiculous. And I think you hear that story, that's nice. But then now, if you haven't known that story, go watch this film again. Mm-hmm. Anytime you see Bookless come in, when he gets to buy him because he's had this payday, when he's running with him, it's just as someone that obviously had dogs, and that is one of my favorite breeds. One of my best friends, for 10 plus years, had a bull mastiff as well. I've always loved that breed of dog. If you didn't have bulldogs, I wish we could have one. But that's something that you go to this film again, and what's the on-screen story is this, we kind of laugh at modern day, the American daydream and things like that. This was so real for this film, and it's because it was real behind the scenes as well as being on the screen. I think that's why it has that effect on a lot of people, that as you grow older, you can look into this more, you can read it in different ways, and you realize, as you said, it's not a boxing film, this is a drama. And it feels so real. And it's, how many dramas are there where you've got plain person, something happens there, you're a wizard Harry, or, you're a Jedi Knight, or something comes up where this person's took out of this bad situation and it's all fixed the click of a finger. This never fixes that. To jump to the end, he doesn't win the championship in this film. I think that's the most important part of this film, is that he doesn't win that title. I think that would discredit everything this film wants to do and it aims for. It would be so cheap, too over the top. First time I watched it, I was like, oh my God, he didn't win. And I think, again, that's what makes me like it more as I've grown old, was that he didn't win because he didn't need to, he didn't have to. And it was written in a way where you're just with him. you're following him. There are times when you question him of how he acts with people. But there are times when you just kind of just love him, and it's weird that not to get into an Arnie Stallone debate, but
it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
As a kid, I loved Arnie more than Stallone. I didn't get the Stallone hype. As I've grown older, Stallone is the one for me. Shouldn't really compare them. They're both legends in their own right. Love both of them. But for me, Stallone's the one that I now have this further attachment to. And the fact he wrote this as well, like everything about this film is just, what a guy, what an absolute legend. And that word is thrown around so easily. Shadow of a doubt. You know, this is one of the best ones ever made. Going into it really quickly. Sorry. Feels like I'm wrapping up. I'm not wrapping up. But,
no.
I've just got
he absolutely is.
To say.
No, he really is, and I think that Stallone is an incredibly underrated actor. You know, as I mentioned, like the kind of like mumbly kind of speech, everyone parodies that, but at the heart of it, he is a tremendous dramatic actor. Yes, he can do the sort of, you know, like Rambo, like machine gun toting badass, and he can do that well. That was kind of the decade, wasn't it? But you know, these more personal roles, he gives it his all, especially, you know, when we get later into the franchise as well. By the time of Balboa and even the Creed films, like Jesus. But there's moments in this, like the breakdown he almost has when he's talking to Mickey, where Mickey finally comes to him and says, like, I want to train you, and he says, where have you been all these years? You know, you had a prime, where's my prime? And it's so believable the way he acts that. So no, absolutely hats off to Stallone. I've always thought he was a fantastic actor. And I think we should get onto it now to talk about some of the other characters. We've had comments from Carl and Hennick right now. Says, I always enjoyed the build-up of the relationship between Adrian and Rocky. And Hennick says, echoes that. Adrian and Rocky, yeah, they were inseparable together. Rocky's shy way of approaching Adrian with a kiss with his sense of humor. Let's get into that now, because for me, this is easily one of the best on-screen relationships of cinema history. Rocky and Adrian, the absolute power couple that they are, going through all these films. And it all started with this one. So I did a bit of reading before this. Apparently the casting for Adrian was very late in the game, almost down to the wire, which is quite surprising when you've got a project like this where you have, you know, two focal pillars of this relationship of this film. And they were trying to look for casting, and I think they mentioned Susan Sarandon was one of them, but she was dubbed too beautiful, too pretty for the role, which I thought was kind of a backhanded comment towards Talia Shire, because I think she looks amazing in this film. But again, like the casting across the board, all of the cast for this film, I can't imagine anyone else in that role. Talia Shire brings such a shy kind of meek quality to Adrian, and you know, everyone does get sort of like a character arc in this film, you know, especially Rocky, but Adrian does as well. She comes into her own. She's this very shy, reserved character, you know, barely talks, so timid, and that's kind of partly down to how her brother treats her poorly. We'll get onto him a bit later. And through this relationship of Rocky and Rocky sort of, you know, with his humor and just being there for her, this relationship blossoms, and you see it in the film. And the two of them have fantastic chemistry together. One of my favorite scenes in the film, the Ice Rink, and sort of going back to what I said about the budget. Originally, that was going to take place in a packed skating rink with all of the skaters. It was going to be too expensive to get all the extras in for the background skaters, so they shot it when it was closed at night time. And one of the best scenes in the film, one of the most personal scenes in the film. And again, it goes back to that realness. The you know, relationships in films are dime a dozen, but nothing ever feels scripted. It never feels like stilted romantic dialogue. It feels like, you know, a conversation that you would have if you took someone on a date, or, you know, someone you see, because he's clearly seen her a lot. You know, she works at the pet store, he goes in every now and then, he's been going in there. So it already establishes that the two aren't meeting for the first time. She has been in the neighborhood. It's a small neighborhood. Everyone knows everyone. It's just beautiful to watch. That's the stuff from the series all the way throughout that really does tug at the heartstrings, especially as you get towards later entries in the film as well.
And you mentioned the ice rink, which I always love that scene. But the one bit that always gets me, I don't know why. It's her first scene of the film. Obviously, she's really shy in the shop, and obviously she's like being a bit weird, you know, not looking up and all this, very very shy. But it's when he walks out the door, and like she kind of pops out like by Rocky, and I don't even remember if the door's shut when she says it, but it's always that kind of like, oh look, they're teasing this, and you don't know how it's going to go. But I think they make the film, you know, it's as much about Adrian as Rocky, to the point that his relationship arc can't work without her, and you get to that final scene again. And I think when I watched it recently, it was so powerful. It's the The fight's over. Of course, he's not won. He doesn't care that he's in this ring of all these people. He doesn't care that he can't see. All he wants to do is be with Adrian. And it just, as what you said, it feels real. It doesn't feel scripted. And I think Talia Shire is perfect for it. I think you go back again to this film being in 1976. She's the sister of Coppola. She's been in The Godfather 1 and 2. Granted, that's not major roles, but for that film, you don't need to do, not to say that anyone's ever in it for the money, but she's obviously read the script and picked this film, and I think it's so perfect that it's so weird whenever I've seen the Godfather films after watching Rocky, and it's like, oh, it's Adrian, but she's very, very different. Like, she's not nervous, she's not shy or anything. She still screams a lot, but I don't know, I think the film can't work without them, the series can't work without them. They are as important to this, certainly this one, as the boxing is. And I think it all elaborates up to what Rocky is. It's not because it's a boxing film. It's not because he's a fighter. It's because you care about him. It's his interactions with all the other cast members. It's his relationships with all of them as well. Because obviously we don't have Adrian. We've got Paulie. We've got Creed. We've got Mick. You mentioned the Mickey stuff's great as well. As a kid, I'd only ever seen the Burgess Meredith in Batman '66.
Same.
And I remember, like, whenever I watched it, I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's the Penguin." And the first time I saw it, I was blown away, and it was really hard, and I loved it. But I think Adrian's, to me, one of the sort of the MVPs of this, and I'm very excited to revisit Rocky 2 for next week, because it's been a long time since I've seen Rocky 2. I've got to admit that. I think I've probably only seen that once or twice, in all honesty.
Wow, okay.
So I've seen the ones I've seen the most is Rocky 1 and 4, as many people probably will say. So I'm really excited to go into some of these other ones, because and I think being at a different age to last time I saw these, I remember we were chatting yesterday. I think I bought these in 2018 in the build up to Creed. I upgraded them onto Blu-ray, and I think I saw the first one. I can't remember if I saw the second. I did see the second, sorry, and then I ended up moving away, so I kind of didn't get to finish off watching the series, which was really weird. But it's nice to revisit this when your mindset is in a different place to what it was when you're younger. I think that's when you can tell the difference with a great film and a good film. So yeah, the Agents Fight stuff, then it just feels real. It just makes you like Stallone more, that he's, although he's this boxer, although he fights, he's a very like gentle person. Like when he wears like his sort of baggy like Christmas jumpers and stuff, it's that kind of like, it's not what you expect from that boxer. And I think that's why his relationship doesn't just work with Adrian. That's why it works with Creed as well. It sort of really steadily builds up to that. And I would love to one day, it's probably at the same, not a script to read, but I would love to know. You mentioned the Ice Rink change. I think it's much better that the Ice Rink was empty. If it was crowded, I don't think that scene could have worked anywhere near as well. Mm-hmm. But I've always been intrigued if the budget's affected other scenes, that you end up getting better scenes from it due to a lack of budget as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that this needed to be low budget. It absolutely did. And just going back to, you mentioned Mickey there, for example. I wanted to talk about him as well, but I was exactly the same as you. Batman was the first thing that I saw him in. And he's great in this. The energy that he brings to it, very kind of similar energy to the Penguin, I want to say. Very similar voice, that wah, 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 that kind of way that he talks. But yeah, no, some really heartfelt scenes in this film, and he is the perfect mentor figure. He is kind of just barking in his ear the entire time. He's this very sort of like hard shell of a man. He doesn't open up very easily, but there are those moments where he still does it. And we get that in Rocky 2 and 3 as well, where it kind of all comes to a head with that. Creed, you mentioned as well, fantastically played by Carl Weathers in this. And again, he's one of those 80 stars as well, when you get to like Predator and things like that. And he's cropping up more now, especially because he's in Mandalorian. Clearly just emulating Muhammad Ali, his antics, the fast talking, the rhyming talk, and his antics in the ring. It was clearly done to sort of mirror Muhammad Ali of the time. Even Joe Frazier gets a cameo in this film. The real life Joe Frazier, who did fight Muhammad Ali as well, comes into this film. So it's interesting how they do bring in those real boxing links as well. And he just offsets it so beautifully, because you need the sort of, I don't want to say Rocky's quiet, but he's unsure of himself. He wants to prove himself, but he's unsure. And you have the complete polar opposite in how animated and bombastic Creed is. And their interplay, he's all talk for the camera. In the press conferences they have before and everything, he's trash talking Rocky, and Rocky's having none of it. And and he's very full of himself in this one. I actually quite like the journey that Creed goes on throughout the rest of the films. We'll talk about this more in Rocky 2, where they get the rematch. But he's just doing this as like a lark, he's all geared up to fight someone else that can't go ahead. So he's just, let's just give someone a shot at the title because it'll be it's the American way. It'll be the American thing to do. Thinks absolutely nothing of it and is completely humbled by the end of this film before we get to the rematch in the next film. So I thought that was because it's not really a rivalry. He's never. It eventually became sort of like the big villain, the big boxing boss battle. You got Clubber Lang in 3. You've got the Super Russian that he has to fight in Rocky 4, and we love those films for it. But he's never really a villain in this, and I like that because they could have very easily gone with that antagonistic sort of angle with Creed, and I think it's better the way it is. Doesn't get loads of screen time. It's kind of peppered in because it does focus on Rocky a lot, and I think that was definitely the right decision. But the scenes that you get from Creed, he's never sort of vindictive. He's not evil. He's not corrupt or anything like that. That's just his personality. That's just the way he carries himself as a sportsman.
And I think that's the main thing with Creed, is that you mentioned the villains on the other films. The fact that it's Mr. T and it's obviously Drago now is Drago to the point, but he was never too much to take you out. When you watch, especially when he gets that final scene, you feel like you're watching two people punching. You found some really good behind the scenes stuff earlier. Just everything with Apollo Creed, it feels like a real sports thing. Like, this modern day era, you get your Floyd Mayweathers, and all that kind of, just talk. They want to be like wrestling. They want to sell the events. I completely understand that. And as you mentioned, sort of mimicking Muhammad Ali. The sort of the showmanship, it feels like you would get that in the sport. And the world champion at the time, he picks the guy because his name sounds cool. The Italian, well, he pronounces the Italian stallion, doesn't he? Just a really weird sort of pronunciation. But I think that's what this thing is. If he just, if he was this villain, then you'd ask, well, if he's an outright villain, then Rocky would be an established boxer because else he would need to take him seriously. And I think it builds up to that dynamic again so well that this film is essentially about Rocky. It's the American dream. He's just been given this chance out of nowhere, and it goes back to the stuff of Mick, where Mickey's like, summed up, Mickey's like, it shouldn't have been anyone but you. That's probably what he thought when he read the newspaper the next day. And Paulie's like, oh, I'm going to get sponsored. It all clicks for the right reasons. And I think if Apollo Creed is this menacing, horrible person, it doesn't work. It just wouldn't make sense why he picked him. But for him to be arrogant because he's the champion and pick someone having a cool name, that's something a sportsman would do. Someone that wants to sell something, something at the last minute. I mean, me and you aren't boxers, but when we have followed boxing, something we've spoken in the past with the odd major fight, someone ever gets injured, they have to bring someone in at the click of a finger, and it is as easy as just finding someone local to do something. Like, not against real sports, but Anthony Joshua got knocked out by that guy that I'm not going to get into it fully, but there was that chubby guy and he knocked Anthony Joshua out, and it was one of the biggest upsets in the history of boxing. I didn't even watch boxing and I knew about it. And it was that because he came in at the last minute because someone's injured. And it makes you think that the sportsmanship stuff does feel real in this Rocky film. And I think that's why it seems to work. Creed needs to be the polar opposite to Rocky because he still needs to be likable. You're just not aligned with him, and I think that's the big difference. You want to like him because it's two people competing, and if you know he's the villain, you ultimately know he's going to lose as well. And I think that's again where this film works, is that Rocky doesn't win. It would have been too cheap. Yeah, exactly. And in his head, the fact he almost walks out, the fact he almost doesn't want to fight, but he just says, all I want to do is go the distance. Rewatching that recently, that had never started me, that scene, until now. Really, so well done. Again, the performance, the writing, everything, and the film doesn't work. Going back even further, what you mentioned, the city, the budget, it just makes it feel real. That it's not, we criticize Trial of Chicago 7 for looking modern. Granted, this isn't made in 2020. When you've got these films that are sort of hyper, sort of, there's like a heightened sense of entitlement, isn't there? That if there was going to be a modern day boxing film, not because it's on 4K, but you'd have this pristine everything's pristine, and you know exactly how it's going to go. And it'd be in New York or it'd be in LA. It wouldn't be in, I'm not saying Rocky's put Philadelphia on the map, no way. But there's a reason why Rocky's one of the biggest tourist destinations in Philadelphia. That one of my friends, you'll know him, so Daz, when he went to New York, he took a day trip out just to do the Rocky Stairs and then come back.
Yeah.
And that's
on my bucket list as well. At some point, exactly. I'd love to do it. Yeah,
exactly. And it's something that, it's what this character, what this film has done for a legacy, and you can't have the other films about this one coming before it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And to your point about the feel of it as well, I'll talk about Paulie in a second because this is going to tie into it. But Carl says, you get the impression it's a tough place to live and the boxing is a way of life, a way to make something of yourself. Not just the boxing being a way of life, but just the place where it's a tough place to live. They really do sort of like capture that slum feel of it as well. When we're introduced to Rocky, he's working for a loan shark who's actually one of my favorite characters in the film, and especially the driver. I know I'm jumping about favorite moments, but he's like, "Here, Rocky, why don't you take her to the zoo?" And he's like reaching into the car. So I love all that stuff. The loan shark's like helping him out with money. He says like, "Hey, go and take Adrian out on a nice date," or something like that. He's such a slimy, sleazy character, and that's just why I love him. But with Paulie as well, you know, guy just hauling meat all day, you know, sort of just working man's job. And you really do kind of get that like blue collar sense and like feel to it. And he wants out of there. He hates it. You know, he's aching. He never probably got a break. He's been working this all of his life, whatever he can. And, you know, he keeps asking Rocky for a job, like, get me out of this. I want to help. And he's shot down. And Paul is an interesting character, you know, played by Burt Young, in that he's a likable character. He is, and he's funny, but like the way he treats Adrian is horrible. And like some of the stuff, like it borders on like domestic abuse. He like never physically hits her from what I remember in the film, but it kind of gets there. The Thanksgiving moment again is another one of my favorite moments where he takes the turkey out of the oven. He's like, "Hey, you want the bird? Go get the bird," and just throws it outside. He's doing it with the best intentions. Like he wants his sister, you know, to meet someone, to find love, to, you know, get in a relationship, get married, and do all the things that basically he didn't do. You know, he says that I've looked after you all your life, you're worthless, and then she throws it right back at him. And that's like the great moment where she comes into her own and finds her courage against him. But he's like never a horrible character. And maybe this is sort of with the hindsight knowledge of watching Rocky 2 onwards with Paulie, where he becomes really likable and gets that unbreakable friendship with Rocky. So maybe those other films influenced my opinion on this than watching it in isolation. But even watching this film again, you know, he does some questionable things. You know, he's like a borderline alcoholic as well, but he's never a horrible guy. He never means ill. He doesn't know how to handle himself, I guess.
You sympathize. The scene when you think you're going to dislike him, which is the Thanksgiving scene, and then he has the breakdown, and then he's the one crying, and you really sympathize with him. And it's about that kind of era and that timing. It's not taking place around like a depression or anything, not like the sort of 30s, but when you go back to the sort of traditional, what they tell you at school about the American Daydream, is that the American Daydream concept came off the back of poverty and everything else. And I think, and that's why Paul is so likable, because he does have issues, and it's what you said, he means well. And I think that's the most important part. He just doesn't know how to do it. He's obviously not social to a point. He's on the best of his sister, and it's his best mate and things. He's funny though, because he is the kind of comic. I know he is comic relief intentionally, but he's not comic relief to the standards that you would think of comic relief. But he does provide that charm to it, and you get, even when he's jealous of the other two, you kind of find yourself sort of smiling as well. So he's one of them, mate. He works perfectly. You don't ever get too much of him, and you don't get too little of him. I think you just get the right amount for them to get that believable relationship, but also that he's not overshadowing Adrian or anyone else that's more important. Because ultimately, I'm not saying he means the least to Rocky, but in terms of the boxing side of things, you know, he's not Creed, he's not his trainer, he's not his girlfriend, it is the friend. And that's understating it to say the least, but you need to build that genuine, and you feel like they're good mates as well when they're drinking. And going back to Rocky being this really likable guy, but he's a bit nervous around him sometimes. He doesn't want to be rude with his sister as well. He wants his permission that he can take her out and everything. Mm-hmm. And I think I really like him. He's someone I didn't like when I was younger. When I first saw Paulie, I just didn't really get him, and I didn't know why. As again, it's the maturity of growing up, living life a bit more, see what people may have been through that you know and stuff like that. So he's one of those relatable characters. And I think everyone knows someone like him. I think that's the big takeaway from it. So again, I can't fault a single cast member of this. And going back to what you said as well, the sleazeball in the car. I love the loan shark. I don't know why his scenes are so funny.
I think he comes back in Rocky 2 as well. I need to go back and watch Rocky 2, but I'm pretty sure he comes back in it as well.
they kind of remind me of, like, them sort of like 70s James Bond films where there'd be like two villains that end up like there's loads of them to count, but they're not to hype up things for next week, but they're like a little double act in themselves where you've got the driver who will make a crass comment, and it's the zoo one, but it's like someone at school, they're building up to a really shit joke, but the problem is that Rocky's walked into the joke because he's genuinely asking about him, and he said he's a loan shark that's likable, he's giving him money, and obviously he's telling him to break people's fingers and stuff, and Rocky doesn't want to do it.
Oh, well, you don't do what I tell you, it embarrasses me. It makes me look bad.
Yeah, they're great. They're well, and I think it's adding that real life stuff to it, that he's not got a lavish day job. He doesn't want to be doing that. Even as far as, I think you told me this recently, that I didn't know it was his brother who's singing in the streets. Even having those guys out drinking, like the little chavvy girl who's like 12 and he takes her home. It's like, you're a creep. And it's kind of funny because in real life, that is actually terrible. You couldn't do that in this day and age. But he means well. But it's just, I don't think
he's just trying to do the right thing. He's got a heart of gold, and he's shut down there. It's interesting though, because that character does come back by the time of Rocky Balboa. I thought that was kind of a nice thing where they brought little Marie, I think her name is, isn't it, or something he calls her in Rocky Balboa. But yeah, no, it all comes together so well. We'll talk about some of our favorite moments now. To be honest, I think I've talked about a lot of them already in passing. I mentioned the ice skating, just everything with the loan shark is brilliant. I really like the moment where Adrian goes back to his apartment after the date. Some of the things that Rocky says, where she says, like, I need to call my brother and tell him where I am. And he just opens the window. He's like, hey, yo, Paulie, I'm with your sister. I'll call you tomorrow or something. Just great stuff like that. And even like the sort of more somber moments, like right before the fight, where he has this incredible like moment of doubt and he's like, I can't do this. And Adrian's right there to comfort him. Love all that stuff. The training montage goes without saying. Gonna Fly Now is brilliant. I think it actually got to #1 in the charts for a short spell as well. It's the archetypal. It is the equivocal training montage song. You hear that song, and as you said, like, inspired you. You went out on a run. Still makes me want to run every single time I see it. And then I remember how much cardio sucks, and I stay inside. But and the ending as well. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the ending, and this is a comment that Carl made, and I guess this is going to sort of take it onto my roundup and pass over to you for your favorite scenes in a minute. It's a masterclass in telling the loser making good story. And the director as well, John G. Alvidson, who directed another great sports franchise as well with Karate Kid. Karate Kid coming much later than this film, obviously. Very similar story, that kind of, the down on his luck kind of character becoming a hero, finding that strength within himself. But it really is, this is one of the best hero stories, a hero sort of, the lowly hero achieving something at the end, this sort of like, this Herculean effort that he goes through to get there. And as I said, it's never about the boxing. It's not about the outcome. At the end, he says, ain't going to be no rematch. Ironically, 3 years later, there is in Rocky 2. But for what it's worth, it's, when he goes the distance, he proves himself. That's all he needed to do. He didn't need to win. He didn't need to win the boxing match. He did what he said he wanted to do. He wanted to stand there for that bell when it rings at the end of round 15 and still be standing. And he achieves that. And when all the reporters crowd around him, this is probably my favorite scene, the ending. He just wants to get to Adrian. He's just shouting for Adrian. He doesn't care. And that's what matters the most. So definitely that final scene for me, it just gets me misty just a little bit, just every time. It's the music as well at the build-up at the end. It's the perfect ending to the film for me.
And I think it's a boxing film, and I'm not saying the least memorable scenes are the boxing fights. The fights are fine, especially the one at the start, which is really boring, but you're not in it for the boxing, and it's that clear at the end where I think it's the Adrian bit that leaves you on that. Oh my god, I love this. It's not the fight. It's not that he loses. And I will say one thing. The one thing which I still really struggle to see. I'm fine with blood, but when they like pop his eye, when it's like bruised over and stuff, still makes me sort of. You gotta cut me, Mick. Yeah, I struggle with stuff like that. But you mentioned the running scene, of course. It's so iconic for the right reasons. And you go back to Rocky 1, and it's because at that point it wasn't iconic.
We've got to bring up the music as well. Hennick says the Bill Conti music is banging. Yeah, no, the score to this thing's incredible.
and you can't fault it. To me, I've said this many times, and there's probably always one film that's pretty wrong, but most classic films have a score to go with it that are as important, that are as memorable, that have those moments. And it's not even the running stuff; it's everything. It's ending. It's the way the Rocky theme's used throughout the entire soundtrack.
The piano and like the slower moments as well, where it comes in.
But my outright favorite scene, it's hard to do, but I honestly think it is probably. Oh God, I don't want to put myself on the spot. My favorite scene from the first one. I don't think it's the ice skating scene. I think that's in the top. I've probably got a top three. I've probably got the ice skating scene, the final scene, and the scene in Butkus. That's more my liver dogs.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the combination of all of them. And then having you spoke about the meat, I mean, the meat bit, that's one of the most iconic scenes as well. Like, how many people do you think 1976 started punching meat like after they're watching that film?
So I found this out actually. Apparently, and he didn't get credited for this either, which I thought was a bit dodgy. But the stair run in Philadelphia and the punching of the meat was apparently what Joe Frazier did during training, during his. I don't know if it was like in the past when he was doing his boxing. But he was never credited for it, which I thought was interesting. So I don't know if that's true. That's what I've read, but apparently it was a training technique from Joe Frazier, so that made it into the film, and then has become one of the most iconic moments in cinema history.
Definitely. Yeah, I say I can't put my finger on a favorite scene. Maybe at the end of the 6 reviews, I'll know it, but for Rocky 1, I think it's the consistency of all of it. Even Mick's scene when you're kind of bored of him talking about the past. And then he kind of does eventually open up, and I think every character in this film has a great scene. Obviously, some have more than the others, but there's a reason why Rocky is involved in every single great scene in this film. I think
that's one of my favorite shots, actually. That Mickey shot where it cuts to outside when he changes his mind, and you can't hear the dialogue. You just sort of get the silhouettes of them down the street and the piano music. It's a beautiful shot. The cinematography as well in this thing is incredible.
He runs out as well. So yeah, I just think it is. Final thought. Sorry. It is a perfect film, and there are many I couldn't slap the word perfect on. And this did everything it had to do to get you to Rocky 2, which wasn't a conversation piece, as you said. It was 3 years down the line. If there was never a Rocky 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this would probably be held in higher regard, which is insane because it already is held in incredibly high regard. I think I don't like Raging Bull. I've seen it once before. I respect a lot of people love it. But, when that conversation comes Rocky versus Raging Bull, most people just know. Oh, it's always going to be Rocky. I'm sorry that Rocky 1 versus Raging Bull, there's no comparison, unfortunately. So that's that. But yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else. I'm kind of all Rockied out, to be fair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say that and we'll get into this as we go into our review. So obviously Tuesday next week, 10 p.m. again for us, we'll be talking about Rocky 2. As the series progressed, it gets steadily more and more ridiculous and then kind of brings it back. It's actually kind of an interesting parallel to the Rambo franchise as well, another Stallone franchise, how it always kind of started as a drama and then it became more about the action, and it kind of, I won't say it loses its way. It becomes something different, but we still love it for being different. But no, it's going to be a good franchise to go into. Maybe that could be one that we talk about down the line. But as I said, we're sticking with the Rockies. So just over to the socials for one final bout. So next week, we'll be talking about Rocky 2. That'll be Tuesday again at 10 p.m. But we have many other videos coming out. And as we've had some people commenting, we want to hear your thoughts on Rocky as well. So be sure to comment, like, share, subscribe. And as we carry on with these retro reviews, but we want to get the conversation going as well. Let us know some of your favorite Rocky moments, your thoughts on the franchise, everything surrounding it. And for future franchises that we'll talk about and every other in-between video that we have, best way to follow us is on Facebook. If you go on to Cinema Savvy, we have all times and days that we're going to go live on there. Twitter at cinema_savvy. And if you'd like to pick up any of our merch, you can go to the TeePublic link in the description down below and check that out. So yeah, that'll do it from us. It's been a good conversation. We've had Carl and Henrik in the comments, so thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next videos that we have. So until then, take care, everyone.